Oh, good morning, everybody. I think as the morning's gone on already, well, certainly the other sessions have kept it high tech. You can see from Caroline and I, we're a bit more old school and we've got bits of paper, so bear with us and hopefully the slides will work for us. Anyway, between us this morning, Caroline and I are going to hopefully focus on seeking to achieve what we think will be a common goal, both for us and for you, which is ensuring smoother application processes. So how can we help? Basically by you helping us. The Authorisations and Innovation Division covers a number of touch points at the Commission for you as licensees during the lives of your own regulatory lives and those of your clients. And there are, of course, a number of events in between as well. So the start and the finish and everything else. We cover authorisations, the online personal questionnaires and online appointments as people move in and out of prescribed positions. We also cover the resignations as people move employment amongst the industry. We also see the change of controllers, the amalgamations, migrations, and of course, finally, surrenders of licenses, normally for good cause. So we want to help to ensure that all of those touch points with the Commission go as smoothly as possible. So we're going to talk today about some of the must-haves and the nice-to-haves during those interactions, and also hopefully give you some tips and answer some of the frequently asked questions that arise. It's worth pointing out that 97% of the applications that we received in 2020 proceeded to licensing, authorisation or registration. And we want to have this high level of acceptance to continue, but ensure that it does so with a review process that is as smooth as possible. Before Caroline focuses on applications, I'm just going to cover a couple of points involving the online portals the Commission runs, and particularly, to start, the online personal questionnaires and online appointments, or OPQs and OAs as we refer to them. Now, as you know, these are really the bedrock of the Commission's work, as they help us to assess whether someone is fit and proper to work within Guernsey's financial services sector. So much so, and this should really go without saying, but we do take it very seriously if an online personal questionnaire is found to be purposely inaccurate or incomplete. And this will be taken into account when considering whether someone is fit and proper to undertake activities in the finance sector. This is all outlined in the guidance to the OPQ itself. So, really, the must-have for the OPQ is don't lie on it. It's not a CV. I'm not sure if many of you in the room are LMUs. If you don't know what LMU stands for, then I can tell you you're not one. And so you can basically continue to snooze through this next tip. Well, actually, it's really more of a must-have. When employees leave an entity, licensees must take responsibility to update the online portals. LMU permissions on the portals need to be removed, and permissions, including any super user permissions, need to be unlinked. This is not a process that the Commission controls. It has to be done at your end. It's not automatic upon someone leaving an entity and updating their OPQ. So please do add it to a task to your employee leaving procedure. They hand in their security tag. You take back the keys to the executive loo, or that might just be a Commission thing. And then you finally update the portal permissions. That, I know, was a fairly technical point, and apologies for that. So if you are still none the wiser, please don't worry, just go back to your firms, find out who your LMU is, which is the licensee main user, give them a bonus, or just a thank you, and tell them that Emma Bailey was bleating on at the Commission seminar about some boring but important things about the portal. As you know, all of this is being recorded, and so they can take a look, if they're not in the audience here, at what we've said, and equally ask us any questions once we're back in the office. I'm now going to hand over to Caroline, who's going to talk through about smoothing some of the actual application process itself.
Thanks, Emma, and good morning, everyone. As Emma said, today we wanted to talk to you about how we can work together to smooth and speed up our application process for everyone. There's nothing Emma or I love more than signing off an application and getting the licence out of the door. And the more efficiently we can do that, the better for us and for you. So, what makes a good application? Well, firstly, Please make sure the application is complete when it's submitted. Now, this may sound obvious, but we do receive many applications that are missing key pieces of information. And it's obviously much more efficient for us and really helps to speed up the process if we can review a completed application in one go, rather than having to request further information. If we have to put the application down because there's information missing, then it inevitably falls back down the queue again because we have to pick something else up in the meantime. So, please review your applications prior to submission and make sure that everything required has been included. If you do have a key piece of information missing, perhaps because you're waiting for something, then please consider holding off submitting the application. But if you must submit it, then it's worth flagging up in the covering letter or the email so that we don't waste time looking for it and chasing you for it. My second point is about online personal questionnaires and online appointments, picking up from Emma's earlier comment. Please ask your clients to submit these as early as possible and ask them to take it seriously. If there are obvious errors, we do return the form to them for amendment, and this holds up the whole due diligence process. Common mistakes that we see are around Section 8 of the form, which deals with appointments and other interests, and here we frequently find interests that haven't been declared. This gives us the impression that the individual has not taken the process seriously, or worse, is trying to hide something. So the message is, if you're unsure about something, please declare it and let us decide if it's relevant. And it's also really helpful if individuals completing the online personal questionnaire would do the online appointment at the same time, so that we can tie the two together with an application. We quite often get personal questionnaires submitted by individuals that are not previously known to us and with no explanation of what they're for. So this means a lot of toing and froing as we contact them to find out why they've submitted the personal questionnaire. And also, please encourage your clients to contact our support desk if they're having any difficulties with any of these forms. It's much more efficient for them to speak to the support desk than to have some toing and froing with the application handler, as the support desk can deal with that relatively easily. Next, the fee. It's really helpful if when you're submitting the application, you can provide details of what you've paid, when you paid it, and which bank account or name of account it's come from, if it's not obviously linked to the name of the application. And we often get cases where the applicant thinks they've paid the fee, but their accounts department hasn't actioned it. So the application gets to the top of the queue for review, only to be held up because we have to chase for the fee. So please ensure your accounts department is aware that this is not a payment that can wait till the end of the month. We don't start work on an application until the fee's been received. And it's worth noting that for fast-track applications, the clock doesn't start until we have the fee. My next point may also sound obvious, but I think it's something that needs saying. Accuracy in your application is important. Particularly, for example, if you have several related companies with similar names, it's important to make sure the correct names are in the correct place and that it's consistent with any structure charts that you might be submitting. We receive many applications with complex structures, and these can be even more confusing if they contain errors. Accuracy and clarity around control and beneficial ownership is also very important, and we will keep digging on that until we're sure that we understand it. And discrepancies between documents can also cause issues for us, cause delays, and we have to try and work out which document's correct. So please do check that all of your documents are consistent before you submit the application. And finally on this slide, there are very few applications that don't require a business risk assessment. So please include one that meets the requirements of the handbook with all of your applications. We're in the process of updating our forms to make this clearer. But as a general rule, if the applicant will be required to have a business risk assessment, then one should be submitted with the application. One of the most common reasons holding up an application is also the need to return an inadequate business risk assessment. So a further tip is to please give that document your full attention when you're submitting the application. Next, I wanted to speak about suitability, or fit and proper requirements. We're required to consider whether applicants meet the minimum criteria for licensing as set out in the various regulatory laws. Now, I must stress, this is not only about whether a proposed controller or director has criminal convictions or has been subject to regulatory sanctions. The minimum criteria for licensing includes many requirements. But today, I just wanted to draw your attention to the wider business conduct matters which are included as part of that criteria, where, amongst other things, it talks about previous conduct and activities, and whether a person has engaged in any business practices which otherwise reflect discredit on his methods of conducting business. So, to give you a recent example, we found adverse comments from a liquidator of a company that an individual had had previous involvement with. The liquidator had clearly been unimpressed with the conduct of that individual, to the extent that it had been included in the publicly available liquidator's report. This caused us to dig a bit deeper into the history of that individual, and the picture we built up was of concern to us. Similarly, in another case, we found adverse comment in a court judgment where the judge had taken the opportunity to comment on the conduct of the individuals involved. Looking at public records, we can sometimes see a pattern emerging where an individual has a history of involvement with many companies that may have been dissolved or compulsorily wound up. This may indicate someone who walks away from their debts or generally has a poor track record. Sometimes there's a complex web of companies with lots of similar names or company names changing. We ask ourselves whether these factors may indicate someone who's trying to hide a corporate history. I'm not sure how many of you take the time to investigate in this way, and it does take time, but it's probably better to take that time at the beginning of the relationship than to have to deal with an insolvency or a regulatory investigation later on. So we're trying to build up a picture of the business record of that individual to assess whether they're suitable to hold a prescribed position in a licensed or authorised entity. And we do appreciate that sometimes information is available to us that you wouldn't have been able to find when carrying out your own due diligence. In those circumstances, whilst we cannot always share it with you, we can often use that information to lead us to open source information that we can draw to your attention. And often in those cases, that will be because we've found adverse due diligence. When we do have adverse due diligence, we'll always seek further information and provide you or the individual with an opportunity for further explanation or elaboration. Please bear in mind that on application, the onus is on the applicant to demonstrate that they meet the minimum criteria for licensing, and therefore we're entitled to seek as much information as we need to help us assess the suitability of that applicant. And this is for the good of all of us, because it's much better to stop an unsuitable applicant at the gate rather than deal with a reputational or enforcement issue later on. And we think that our interests should be aligned here. And whilst we know you have business pressures, surely a problem client is one that you could do without. Therefore, if you know that we have concerns, we do ask you to use that opportunity for reflection and perhaps a reassessment of your client. Please don't simply see it as an administrative matter or an area that you need to be defensive about. If we, having obtained all of the information, we still have material concerns, and we will often invite you to withdraw the application. It's helpful if you can take that seriously, because it means that neither Emma nor I are prepared to sign off on the license, basically. So in those circumstances, we would then refer to an application review panel to work with us in circumstances where we ask you to withdraw an application. And as Emma mentioned earlier, 97% of applications proceed to licensing. Some don't proceed simply for operational reasons, so it's a really small proportion of applications that we ask you to withdraw. This slide just gives you a quick flavour of the process we go through with each application. We do try to deal with them strictly in order of receipt, Of course, there are some fast-track schemes which we commit to deal with in specific timeframes, but other than that, we simply work our way through them. So it is difficult for us when people ask, how long will my application take? If you submit it at a quiet time, obviously, it gets to the front of the queue more quickly. So we're not trying to be difficult if we sometimes genuinely can't give you a definite answer about how long your application will take. And we do ask that you manage your client's expectations accordingly. In practice, all of these stages can run concurrently as far as possible. So the due diligence can be going on in the background. If the reviewer has any issues or concerns, they can refer to one of our technical specialists or to myself or Emma during the course of their review. So by the time it gets to the Four Eyes review, hopefully any issues have been resolved. If at this stage there are still any unresolved matters, then we do have the option to refer to the application review panel, as I mentioned earlier, not only for adverse due diligence, but in areas where there are matters of maybe policy or legal interpretation. And finally, from me, if I can get that to work, just a few tips when communicating with the Authorisations division. Firstly, if I can make a plea to avoid chaser emails, if at all possible. Every chaser that we have to respond to obviously means less time that we have to deal with the actual applications. If you do have a very tight deadline, please make that clear when you're submitting the application. Big bold letters in your covering email should do the trick. And we will do our best to meet those wherever possible. And it's really not necessary to follow up your application a week later just to check that we got it, because that really won't speed up the process. If you are submitting an unusual or complex application, then it's always helpful to have a meeting, so please don't be shy of requesting one. We can always then give you a steer as to what particular information we'll be looking for. And finally, we just have several ways for you to contact the Authorisations division, including our wonderful support desk for all your PQ portal queries. One tip from them that they've asked me to pass on is that it's better to access the portal from our website rather than from a bookmarked link, as apparently this does cause some problems. And we also have the secure egress upload facility if you wish to use that. So I hope that's been of some help, and I'll hand back to Emma.
Thanks, Caroline. So as Caroline says, hopefully that has helped, but just to reiterate a couple of points that we've mentioned this morning, if we are still on the morning, I think we are, just about. Why? Always think it and ask it. It's the most helpful of questions, the most helpful way to start a question. It's often not asked, though, perhaps through a fear of just really not understanding what's said back to you, or fear of being looking perhaps a little stupid. But it does really help, and it also helps prevent a whole heap of problems later when you do get a response which you know doesn't make any sense. Of course, the what, who, where and how are great bedfellows as well. So also look at the overall picture. Have you looked at all of the key players? The other examples Caroline's mentioned earlier as well, what to look out for. Have you thought about what is in it for the investors? Why are so many commissions or fees being charged in a structure that they eventually all end up into the same pocket? And ultimately, as I say, does the structure make sense? A good mantra is to ask, listen, review, and then repeat all of that, then submit the application to us. If you ask the questions, then we don't have to, and we don't end up in a position, as Caroline described, of having to ask for the application to be withdrawn. We know that some licensees have actually turned down applicants before it reaches us, and in many cases, well, in some cases, that's been as a result of adverse due diligence that they found. Now, where appropriate, they have made suspicious transaction reports to the FIS, but they've also advised us. And the advantage in telling us is that we can then take a note of that applicant and look out for it coming in from other service providers. In a recent instance, that did happen. The new service providers weren't even aware of the principal that actually had a criminal record. He'd removed himself from the structure and so wasn't visible anymore, but was certainly there behind the scenes. We were aware and able to provide the new service providers with some public source information that pointed to his criminal record and meant that they actually withdrew as well. This meant we disrupted that individual from coming and working in the jurisdiction. Finally, we've added in this slide just to prove that we are accountable. We're accountable to commissioners, and there are many in the front row, and also to you as well, in terms of turning around the applications in a timely manner. We publish these statistics on our website, and the quarter one for this year is due to be published in the coming weeks. But for the last quarter of 2020, you'll see there that we had 15 standards that we measured. Each standard relates to an application and its specific turnaround time. The targets we have to achieve are to address all of those applications for each standard within 90% of the time that is allocated. So, for example, on a change of controller, there are 60 days that we are required to complete those within. That is also, as it happens, a statutory obligation that we have to adhere to. As you can see there, in 11 of the standards, we did meet that 90% target turnaround, and indeed for 8 of them, we actually achieved 100%, or if not even exceeded that. So the point here is just really to say we are accountable so that you do know that we are proceeding with the applications as soon as we possibly can. Finally, I just wanted to comment that what we've said this morning is said in the context of that we do understand the pressures that you're under to attract new business, to retain it, and to deliver good customer service. Both Caroline and I have worked in the industry, so we do know the problems that you're facing. We will continue to work to ensure that we help you service your customers as well as possibly we all can, and hopefully show that the Commission, in doing so, is endeavouring to ensure that we attract good business into the jurisdiction. Okay. Thank you, and thanks for your patience.
Thank you.